This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Maxine Bell, podcast manager for the AC, and I'm delighted to bring you this introductory series exploring mental health in coaching, aimed at both coaches and supervisors. I will be talking to coaches, supervisors and experts in this field to inspire and inform you towards better supporting your clients, as well as taking care of your own mental health and well-being. You will gain invaluable insights and practical tips, both for your professional and personal development, to help you coach better, building resilience and understanding in a stressful world. We will be discussing sensitive topics, so do take care of yourself and ask for help from a friend, colleague or professional if you need it. We will be providing a list of helpful resources and contact numbers on our webpage and in the show notes on the podcast channels, but do check your local area for help. Though informative, this podcast does not replace professional help or training. In today's episode, I'm in conversation with Frances Masters about stress, anxiety and depression. Frances Masters is the CEO of Fusion Therapeutic Coaching Limited. Frances defines stress and anxiety, explains the signs of worsening anxiety and the causes and many symptoms of panic attacks. We learn the impact of chronic anxiety on health and the more subtle symptoms of chronic anxiety. Frances shares some assessment tools she uses and how to and when to refer a client for further mental health support. We look at depression, its symptoms and everyday things that help, as well as emotional hijacking, the impact of depression on coaching sessions, and how best to support clients using her innate human needs model, an holistic approach, and simple coaching techniques. Frances's down-to-earth approach is a perfect remedy for helping our clients, or ourselves, with these issues. She has been an integrated counselling coach and trainer for over 20 years and co-founded the Bedfordshire-based therapeutic coaching charity Reclaim Life in 2008 and is the author of PTSD Resolution, Defeating Panic, Reclaiming Life. She is the founding principal of the Integrated Coaching Academy, and where she's authored and delivered the Fusion Diploma in Therapeutic Coaching and also the NCFE Accredited Certificate in Therapeutic Coaching Skills. Her mindfulness-based mind management skills certificate and online training, Breathe Stress Away, integrate advanced counselling and coaching practices in the model she named Fusion. She has now brought her therapeutic coaching diploma into alignment with the accreditation requirements for the Association for Coaching in recognition of their support of the growing wellness coaching niche. She sees the Fusion model as a professional route for coaches who wish to integrate core counselling skills into their working practice in a safe and ethical framework. So welcome, Frances.
Hi, Maxine.
That's a lot of achievements.
Thank you. It sounds a lot, but then I'm quite old, so...
Yeah, and I actually love the title of your book, actually, Defeating Panic, Reclaiming Life. It's connected a bit to what we're talking about today, but I think for many people recovering from trauma, the reclamation is a really important thing in that reclaiming your life. So
yeah, well, I mean, the notion of reclaiming life came from my clients, really, and a lot of people would say to me, "Thank you for giving me my life back." To which my response was, "Well, no, you did it yourself, really." But that's kind of how the naming of the charity and the book really happened.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we'll hear more about you and your story as we go on. But today's topic, stress, anxiety and depression, unfortunately a topic that's more and more common in most people's lives. So, but to start with, let's start with a simple thing. Could you firstly give your definition of stress and anxiety?
Okay, well, stress is a normal, or anxiety is a normal response to stressful situations that happen in life. And anxiety and stress, they do serve a purpose. We've all got a things to do list. We've all got a reason we need to get out of bed in the morning. And the kind of stress hormones that we get, like adrenaline and cortisol, they help motivate us and so can be very useful in the short term.
Yeah, that's really interesting and very succinct description. So it's a normal reaction to everyday events that happen, such as getting an unexpected bill or being late for an appointment or something like that. That's the sort of situation where we kind of recover quite quickly from. We have coping mechanisms and we recover, we're able to regulate our emotions and thoughts. But
Yeah.
what we're talking about
Yeah.
today really is when anxiety becomes more severe, when it starts to impact our lives more. So what are the signs that normal anxiety and stress is getting worse?
Well, we all run background stress. And if you're very lucky, it's at a manageable level. It feels comfortable. And if you think about a line where you have your background stress and another line where you've reached screaming pitch, hopefully there's a big gap in between. But if you start to worry about something, if you start to ruminate about something, if you start to get constantly anxious about something, or have a negative kind of internal dialogue, then your background stress level starts to rise. And it starts to pump more stress hormones into the body. And at first you don't really notice because it doesn't produce any symptoms. But if it continues to rise, you will start to experience things like, depending on your physiology, sleepless nights, might be headaches, might be a bad back, might be some irritable bowel syndrome, something like that. And it really depends on your particular physiology. But if your background stress level continues to rise, it gets closer and closer and closer to screaming pitch. And then if you're not careful, the last straw that breaks the camel's back tips you over into something like a full-blown anxiety attack. So if you think about perhaps the mother who's pushing a toddler around in a supermarket and drops a packet of eggs on the floor and bursts into tears and runs out, it's not really anything to do with the eggs. That was just the final straw. Her background stress level was already very, very high, and she didn't have much room between that and panic attack.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I think I certainly can relate to that, where something minor can just tip you over the edge.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it feels like it comes from nowhere, but actually it's probably been building for quite a long time. The other way, I mean, that's the kind of slowish route, and it can take a long time to get there. But there's a fast route as well. And the fast route to something like an anxiety attack or a panic attack can be a pattern match. So if you seem to overreact in the here and now to what's happening in the here and now, then it's possibly to do with something in the past that this reminds you of, because the brain is constantly matching patterns. So that's something to be aware of as well. So sometimes a panic attack really can feel as though it's come from out of the blue, and it can be a shock when it happens.
So it's almost like there may have been an event when you were younger that you've kind of buried away somewhere, and
Could
maybe
be.
in the present something happens that for some reason triggers an emotional memory, even if you don't remember
Yeah.
the details, and your body's
Yeah.
reacting actually to maybe something from the past, or the reaction is more related to the extent of what happened in the past rather than what could be happening now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can think of a lot of clients, but one client comes to mind in particular, who was a graphic designer. He was a lovely guy, but when he sat down to start explaining what his issues were, he described panic attacks that were absolutely taking his life over, and he had several a day. But it had started. I always ask, when did it start? And it has started when his father died suddenly of a heart attack behind the wheel of a car. And quite soon after, he found that when he got behind the wheel of his car, that he would start to have symptoms. At one point, he even called an ambulance out. He genuinely thought he was in the middle of having a panic attack, heart attack. And but there was nothing wrong with his heart at all. It's just that being behind the wheel of a car reminded him so intensely of what had happened to his father that he now experienced the symptoms himself. And now he couldn't drive, and panic attacks just dominated his day. And he had a terrible range of symptoms.
As you're talking about panic attacks, I mean, I think most people know what they are, but do you want to just clarify what you mean by a panic attack when something becomes a panic attack?
Yeah, well, I can run you through the symptoms because they're particular. You will experience your own particular panic attack depending on your physiology. So right from the top, people can experience a feeling of fuzziness, foggy thinking, pounding in the ears, dry mouth, inability to breathe, a choking sensation, Most people are familiar with things like pounding in the chest, but because it's associated with fight or flight, you can get sweatiness of the palms, you can get shakiness, you can get a feeling that you want to be sick or go to the loo, your legs can feel weak. There's so many symptoms that people can experience, and a lot of people do end up in A&E because they genuinely think they're either having a stroke or they're having a heart attack.
Yes.
It's really common.
Yeah, no, it is. And you've described a wider range of symptoms there that I think most people might be aware of. I think most people associate it with the breathing and the brown paper bag sort of thing, but actually there's a lot more to it. So thank you for sharing. It's really useful.
Yeah, affects the whole body.
Yeah, it does. And I was just thinking as well, we're talking about some symptoms that are quite emotional, but over time, I guess chronic anxiety is going to impact you physically. If you've got all this adrenaline and cortisol floating around, you're potentially going to end up. And I think this is where Gabor Mate has been talking about recently, isn't it? That this is what causes chronic inflammation in people, is this chronic anxiety and stress in us. So it's not good for us.
One of the first things that goes out of balance is your breathing. So, and it's very, very easy to get caught up in chronic hyperventilation syndrome, which is, it's quite natural for our breathing to change when we're faced with a stressful situation. So back in the days of caveman, of course, it would have been to do with having to fight or run away from a wild animal, something like that. But these days, in response to stress, we have the same reaction, which is our breathing becomes shallow. We perhaps have a sense that we're holding our breath. But when we're relaxed, our out-breath is slightly longer than the in-breath. So when we breathe in, we engage the sympathetic nervous system, which is to do with fight or flight. But when we breathe out, we use the parasympathetic nervous system, which is to do with rest and digest. So if you engage a breathing pattern where you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, then you tap into the body's innate relaxation response.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We were before this call, we were just talking about how science is catching up about breathing after thousands of years of things like meditation and breathing techniques that have happened in some ancient cultures. Now the science is now backing that up, isn't it? And which is what you've just explained.
It is, because the primary, I guess a few people now are familiar with Porges' polyvagal theory, but here's the science that safety takes absolute priority, and that we almost have two nervous systems, one that comes into operation if we don't think we're safe, and we're kind of hypervigilant, we're operating from fight or flight, we're not very sociable perhaps, but when we feel safe, then the social brain engages and we become much more sociable and we can form relationships and we're relaxed and we just function so much better than being on fight or flight.
That's really interesting. And I want to stay on topic today, but that is an important part of what we're talking about, though, with anxiety. So it's good to have some understanding of that. It's very useful. I was just thinking as well, I know I was very good at this myself, and I think many of us are actually can be quite good, especially if you've had chronic anxiety, of actually covering it up quite well. I've been in very responsible roles as nurse and midwife, and looking like I'm absolutely fine on the surface. And I see that in a lot of people I know, where on the surface you're not necessarily picking up anxiety, or it's nothing overt, and we can be very good at hiding it. So I was just wondering, as coaches, if your client walks in a room, are there some sort of more subtle symptoms that they might pick up on rather than something as obvious as a panic attack? Something they could watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. You're probably going to be tuning into some non-verbal communication. Yeah. So you might have a client who looks as though they've dressed differently. Perhaps they've not taken as much care of themselves. Or you might find that somebody is late for an appointment. That can signal that they kind of just don't want to be there, or they're just not very organised. You might notice perhaps that they are looking a bit tense or nervous. They might be fidgeting. They might be clicking the pen on and off. I've seen that as well. Just signs and symptoms of underlying anxiety. But you're right. People are great at hiding it, and particularly in the workplace. The question, "Hi, how are you?" is the question to which nobody really wants an answer.
That's right.
Because the required response is, yeah, fine, or I'm getting along, or I'm getting there, or I'm okay. That's what we're supposed to say. And if you genuinely opened up about how you were feeling to everybody who asked you how you are, you'd probably find they ran a mile. I mean, a great way for a coach to get an assessment is to get a client to do some subscaling, which is subjective units of distress scaling, just to say to them in the here and now, on a 1 to 10, where's your anxiety level today? Where 10 is screaming pitch and 1 is really zenned out. Or you can reverse it and say, on a 1 to 10, where's your mood today? Where 10 is I feel great and 1 is not so good today. And you'll get a much more accurate and insightful response. Plus also, once you get somebody to start scaling their own well-being, they have to step back into their observing self and kind of check it out for themselves, because a lot of people aren't very good at checking out for themselves how they're feeling.
Yeah, which is why we end up with burnout, because that's been going on for a long time before you've got to the point where you suddenly wake up one morning and you don't fully can function.
I mean, I use a much more detailed, what I call a clinical feedback form, where I get a client to fill in which of their innate needs is being met and how they're feeling subjectively about life. And then I put them on a continuum of well-being, sort of 1 to 100 at the bottom. And that takes minutes, less than a minute to fill in. And it gives me such a lot of feedback about the client. So I don't have to guess. I always know for sure how they're feeling.
And do you think in the current climate, with all the mental health issues that are rising, is this something that should be brought into coaching on a more regular basis, this, at least on the scaling level maybe, to check in with clients how they're doing, or is that not our responsibility?
Well, I think it's going to be very useful for coaches to have a real insight to what's going on for their client. Something you can use in coaching, which is very easy, and is an ORS, an outcome rating scale, or an SRS, which is a session rating scale. And these are freely available on the internet. And right at the end of the session, you just get a client to put a cross on a line. It takes seconds. And it just asks things like, how do you think today's session went? Did we cover the things you wanted to cover? Were you able to speak? And it gives you absolutely instant feedback on how your client's feeling.
Yeah, that's really nice and really simple tools. Thank you for that.
Really simple, and it's out there for everyone to use.
Yeah, particularly if you do have a sense that something's not right with that client, it can just appear as a normal part of your activity almost, but it gives an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you say, it gives an opportunity for the client themselves to think, oh, actually, I'm only a 3 today.
Yeah.
Wow, maybe I need to look at that.
Yeah, well, why is that? What's going on? Why am I 3? Something I do all the time myself.
Exactly. And I guess if you've got a client you're concerned about then, and if you had that scaling and even if you start at the beginning of the session, how was your mood today, or how was your anxiety level today? And they say, 8 out of 10, then you've got a chance to use some coaching questions to potentially explore it. I guess my question is how far do coaches explore this? When do they need to maybe refer? I mean, your particular model of coaching is also it's a fusion model with counselling. So you're going to have some skills and some knowledge that maybe some coaches don't. So
yeah,
I guess that plays into it. But what's your thoughts on that, about what the role of coaches is in this situation?
Well, I think if you are purely coaching, business coaching, something like that, and you get a sense that the client is suffering from anxiety or depression, then it's probably very important to refer them to either a mental health practitioner or primarily their GP to start off with, so that perhaps a proper assessment can be made. But you're right, people are very good at covering it up. That's the difficulty. And how will you know unless they tell you, unless they communicate?
And also with coaching, because it's about the client having the inner resources and bits. We've had from some of our other guests is suggestions that you're not referring in the normal way, in the sense that some of the roles I've done in the past, like as a teacher or as a midwife, I had the sort of power to do a referral, to mention it to the patient, obviously, but then to do a referral. Whereas the coaching, it's a little bit different. They've come in contracted for one particular thing, maybe. So have you got any tips for how a coach can get to the point where the client is maybe considering, or maybe I should go and get some help, because it won't be a direct referral as such from a coach, will it? Unless you thought it was very serious, unless you thought someone is at harm to themselves or other people.
Yeah. I mean, probably the best way is to find out more about your client holistically, to find out more about their life. I know coaching can be quite goal focused, but goals don't exist in isolation, and even executives are human beings, and as human beings we have innate needs, we have innate human needs, and if your needs are not being met in balance from your lifestyle, you're going to start to get some symptoms of stress or distress or depression in some way. So, I mean, it can be helpful for perhaps a coach to get to know their client more holistically, more as a person, not just the person who goes to work, but a person who has a life outside work, to get a kind of three-dimensional view of that client and what's going on for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, and it's certainly something that I can't do it any other way. In some ways, humans can't be put, I can't say the word compartmentalized. Sorry for that. In that way, can we? We're not, like you say, we're not just work machines. We're part of a family. We're part of a unit. We're part of society. We're part of many things. We've got many parts of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And I think you've mentioned your innate needs thing, which we will dive into a bit more. That's just really good advice, and I think actually it's personally more rewarding for me when I work that way. You can potentially have a deeper, longer lasting kind of change in someone when you're looking at it like that, can't you?
Plus also, I mean, how many people have you got in your life who actually are good listeners, who are actually prepared to listen to what's going on for you? And the chances are, the further up the tree you go, the higher you climb, the less people you've got that you can rely on rather than more. And people can end up in leadership roles, but actually feeling very isolated. And who can they actually talk to openly and honestly and be themselves, a human being?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's such a core basic coaching skill. It's not like you need to have any special qualification to do that. You just need to listen. Yeah,
just
really listen as well, isn't it? It's that proper deep listening, not just the superficial one. So that's a lovely simple tip that every coach should be able to do and should need to do.
Well, sometimes we get a bit frightened of the silence, don't we? And I do remember saying in a training session, I think it must have been on the run up to Christmas, when you rearrange the letters in listen, what does it spell? And of course, the answer I was hoping for was silent, rather than the one I got, which was tinsel.
Yes. Yeah. But that's quite a good visual memory.
Yeah.
For somebody, actually, even though you didn't get silent out of listen, you end up with tinsel. But now I've got an association now. I'm going to start thinking of silent tinsel for some strange reason. But thank you. Yeah, that's really good. So we've talked a bit about stress and anxiety, but we're also talking about depression today. What is depression?
Well, depression, the kind of depressive symptoms you get are low mood, wanting to withdraw, sleep problems, for instance, lack of energy, physical aches and pains. People don't necessarily associate that with depression, things like headaches. So that tipping over from psychological into physical symptoms can be very apparent. I mean, I've got a formula for how to get very depressed, if you want to hear it.
Yes, carry on.
Well, if you follow these instructions, you will definitely get very depressed, and I'll explain why. Which is, so the starting point for getting very depressed is to find something to worry about. So if you're worrying about something in the daytime, and very often they're kind of circular worries, they're the same old worries that go round and round and round in your head. But the role of our dreams at night time is to unravel the emotional arousals and worries of the daytime. And it's quite natural for mammals to dream for 2 hours a night. That's quite normal and natural. But if you're over worrying in the daytime, what you tend to do is you're having to do more dreaming at night time to unravel the worries of the day. And so then you're staying in the kind of shallow sleep, which is rapid eye movement, REM sleep. And you're not sinking into the deeper, slow wave, restorative sleep, because the brain takes priority. But of course, it's the deep sleep that repairs the body, because as we move around in the daytime, we're tearing muscles as we move around, and they have to repair at night in deep sleep. So then what can happen is that specifically in over dreaming, we're using up motivational energy, because if you look at the brainwave patterns of people who are dreaming, it's almost identical to being awake. But it's okay for 2 hours, but longer than that can really start to take its toll on the body. Then you can wake up in the morning and you might have been asleep for 7 hours, but if it's been a shallow, restless kind of sleep, then you're going to wake up feeling pretty tired and worn out in the morning. Well, now you've got two problems, because you've got the original worries and anxieties, but now you're feeling quite low energy and demotivated. And that's really the cycle of depression. That's kind of how it starts and how it maintains.
Do you also believe it's a chronic suppression of emotions? That I'm talking about negative emotions like grief and fear and shame, those kind of things.
Yes, it can be. I mean, if you are feeling depressed, that really is the time to work with somebody who understands those things. And yes, it can be to do with something that's happened in the past. It can be to do with traumas. It can be to do with something as simple as not getting enough full spectrum light. You know, it's absolutely extraordinary that indoors we receive about 10 to 100 units of light per hour. And light, full spectrum light, travels through the retina of the eye and onto the brain and affects the serotonin level. That's our feel-good hormone. So 10 to 100 indoors. But outdoors, even on an overcast day, you can receive up to 10,000 units of light per hour.
Gosh.
So the difference between being outdoors and indoors is absolutely huge. So if you can get outdoors for 20 minutes early in the day, even if it's raining and overcast, you're going to have a real impact on your mood. Now, if you were lucky enough to be outdoors at midday on a really sunny day, you could receive up to 100,000 units of light per hour through the retina onto the brain, and has an immediate effect on your own well-being, your serotonin levels.
Gosh, that's incredible statistics. And it's reminded me of a book I read years ago called Beat the Black Dog, of a guy who had depression, and he actually started to heal his depression by going on walks. And the first one, he could only manage like 3 minutes the first day, and he built up to 5 minutes, and then he went to 10 minutes, and he gradually got his walks longer and longer. And he just made that, if there was one thing he did every day, it was to go for this walk. And even though he started off very short walks, you know, the end of the street and back, but he gradually, slowly started coming out of his depression. It was a really interesting read. So,
absolutely. And I think it was the great Milton Erickson who used to make his depressed clients count the chimney tops on the walk back home, because he said you can't feel down when you look up. And he's absolutely right, because that ties in with body language as well. So the work of Amy Cuddy on power poses, and just how you hold yourself, how you stand looking up rather than looking down. That can impact your mood as well. There's lots of things we can do to help ourselves. So everybody who came along to Reclaim Life, and all of my clients, I would certainly tell them, advise them to go outside and have a 20-minute walk every day to help with depression, but also to teach them breathing techniques to be able to calm anxiety. Two really powerful tools that we can all use.
So I think there's a lot of undiagnosed depression out there. I think a lot of us may have had some mild depression or other throughout our lives that we either thought wasn't worth getting help for or denied about. So I think in that respect, it may be that it's going to walk through the door of a coach's room more than we realise. And even though coaches, it's not their role to diagnose any mental health condition whatsoever, what sort of things would a coach be looking out for if somebody was, similar to the anxiety and depression, I expect, but is there anything particular with depression that you might notice in a client that would concern you?
Yes, I suppose you would notice low mood. I mean, I would definitely suggest using some kind of feedback form so that you can specifically ask about people's mood. So doing some scaling, just asking, where are you on a 1 to 10 would be very useful. People are more likely to give an accurate response to that rather than the how are you feeling, because we're kind of programmed to just say, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm well, I'm getting there. That's our immediate response. But when you drill down just a little bit and ask them to scale their mood, you're going to get a much more accurate response from people.
And I guess some of these things can come out in conversation, like they might make a throw-out comment about they're not eating very well, or they're overeating, or they're not sleeping well. You need to maybe pay attention to little comments that suggest that there's a lack of motivation in even caring for themselves.
Yeah, that's it. And you might see it in their appearance, for instance, or turning up late for an appointment, or you might have heard perhaps they're having difficulty meeting deadlines. They might have trouble concentrating. One of the things about worry and anxiety is it raises emotional arousal. The emotional brain and the rational brain, they don't operate very well at the same time. The more emotional you become, it kind of suppresses your rational thought. There's very good reason for that. And it goes back to fight or flight, because basically if you find yourself in a super stressful situation and the body thinks you're going to have to fight something or run away, then it engages the fight or flight system and it switches off rational thought. And it's called emotional hijacking. I mean, if you think about it, if you were in the middle of the road and there was a bus hurtling towards you, there would be no time to make a list of all the different possibilities here, because you'd be dead. So the emotional brain disables the rational brain temporarily while it saves your skin, basically. And then when it settles back down afterwards, the rational brain takes control. But because the emotional brain is a very basic part of the brain, it's kind of very black or white. It's kind of do or die. I'm okay or I'm not okay. But what people may notice in particular is that the more emotional they become, the less rational they become, and the less they're able to focus on a task, for instance, because the emotional brain will interrupt the rational brain. You just won't be working at your optimum level.
So in that regard, that can show up in a coaching session, because if you've got someone who's originally come in with a particular goal or some life change they want to make, you're supporting them with, there could potentially be a sudden or a slow switch with the way they're even responding to the coaching, some kind of almost shutdown of energy or something that may creep in. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, people can look distracted. They're not focused.
Yeah.
You'll have a sense perhaps that they're not quite present. They're not quite with you. They're there physically, but they're perhaps not there psychologically. And we're very good at as human beings in kind of picking up on these signals, but we don't always know what to do about it.
Yes, yeah. So we can brush over them or minimise them even potentially in the moment, because especially if we don't know what to do, which sometimes coaches might not know what to do depending on their own experience with life and work. Some of us will have more experience and skills to be able to adapt with that. But just from the advice you gave about stress and anxiety, all we're going to do really is use our coaching question skills to kind of get the client to think about themselves, how they're feeling, whether they feel they need more help. Or I guess you can also use a recontracting sort of situation potentially if something arose. Is that a possible tactic? Or
yes, I mean, I suppose it could be for somebody who's going into a coaching situation. If you're an integrative practitioner, if you're a counsellor coach or a therapeutic coach, then it wouldn't be necessary to recontract because your client knows that you've got some psychological training as well. and they're probably they've got an understanding that you're probably going to start looking at their life in a holistic way and not just looking perhaps at goals and motivation and the GROW model, for instance, that they're going to be expecting something a little bit different.
And do you think that prolonged stress and anxiety will always lead to depression, or is it just with some people?
No. I mean, if it was unchecked, it probably will lead to depression because if you think about the low mood, the low motivation, people start to withdraw and they're not going to get their innate human needs met. People perhaps they give up hobbies because they don't feel like doing it, or they withdraw from friends. They don't have so much fun, for instance. They might start to become socially isolated. They might stay at home more. And all of these things mean that your innate human needs are not being met. And so you're much more likely then to move into longer term depression. You have to cut into it at some point.
Now, the innate human needs is a model that you use or you created, Frances. Do you want to just explain a bit more to our listeners what you mean by that? Because not everyone might be familiar with the idea.
Well, as human beings, we are born into the world with a set of innate needs. And if you get your needs met in balance, then you feel good about life, you flourish. If your needs are not being met from your lifestyle, then you're likely to experience some symptoms of stress or distress or depression in some way. And that's the role of our emotions. The role of our emotions is kind of to push us towards getting our innate needs met. So if you wake up in the morning, you've got a kind of low mood or symptoms of anxiety, that's your emotions tapping you on the shoulder and saying, could you do something about this, please? Unfortunately, what a lot of people do when they experience these uncomfortable emotions is they do go to their GP and they might be referred for something like counselling, but they might also get a prescription for SSRIs or antidepressants, which can kind of mask the symptoms, but it perhaps doesn't make the real problem go away, which is your life's not really working for you. But I could run through what I call the recipe, the happiness recipe, if you like, and let you know what our innate needs are, because if you're a human being, the chances are these are going to be some of the key needs that you need met from your lifestyle.
Yeah, no, do share. I'm sure we've got plenty of listeners that want to hear that. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I can supply a PDF with some of this information in, if you like, as well. So
that would be lovely, yes.
It spells out safe space. And somebody said to me, if you had the recipe for happiness, you'd probably be a very wealthy person. I said, well, for the last 20 years of my professional career, I've based it on this recipe for happiness. And it's kind of worked out quite well, but I'm not a millionaire yet. So, but I'll just run you through. So security is really important for us as human beings to feel safe and secure. And it kind of takes priority. So if, for instance, there were bombs dropping outside right now, you would not be able to focus on what I was saying because your safety takes absolute priority and it'll grab your attention. So, for instance, if somebody's not feeling safe and secure in their life, they're going to find it difficult to focus and concentrate, for instance. And we do see this a lot in children. If they're feeling bullied or intimidated at school or at home even, perhaps they're not able to concentrate at school and they get identified as having behavioural problems. But it's actually that they're just not feeling safe and secure. And so they can't concentrate because it's drawing their attention. Attention is a very important human need. So the giving and receiving of attention is absolutely critical. There's an old African greeting which just says, I see you, I acknowledge you. And of course, if people don't acknowledge us, if we feel isolated, then how do we know we exist? So we all know, for instance, that with children in particular, any attention is better than no attention. So they'll play up just to get attention. And human beings, adults, we do the same thing. The F in safe space stands for fun with family and friends. And of course, we do need that feeling of connection to be part of a group. And historically, we've done much better when we are part of a group. because back in the days of the caves, if we were outside the group, if we were in isolation, then we could be picked off by wild animals. So just being part of a group for a human being feels good. Emotional intimacy is very important. That's really just having somebody in your life who you can just relax, kick off your shoes and be accepted, warts and all, really. Because we do tend to put on a mask with many people. But if you've got at least one person in your life who you can just be accepted for being you, that's going to really, really help you. Status is very important. We all like a pat on the back. We all like to feel that there's a job that's been well done. And in the workplace in particular, just having that acknowledgement that you've done a good job will give you a feeling of just the feel-good hormones, the reward centres just telling you that you've been acknowledged. The P in safe space stands for privacy. And even though we are social beings, we do have the need to withdraw from time to time, to kind of step back and hear our own thoughts. I'm thinking perhaps back to when I was a new mum. There just really felt as though there was absolutely no time, and just retreating to the loo and bolting the door just for a couple of minutes, just to have some time where you could just be on your own. But even then there'd be a knock at the door, Mum, where are you? So being able to withdraw is really important, and we will experience symptoms of stress and distress if we're not able to get some quiet time for ourselves from time to time. Achievement is another one. We like to have a feeling that we're getting somewhere, we're meeting our goals, that our life has meaning and purpose. And control is a big one. Control gets a bad press, and people talk about control freaks, but as human beings, we love to feel that we're in control of our lives. We like to feel that we're in the steering wheel. We're driving our life where we want it to go. And if you are feeling controlled, or if you're feeling bullied in some way, you're going to experience some stress or distress. And that's your emotional brain, again, trying to communicate something to you, which is something in your life is not working. Could you do something about this, please? And then the last one is really engagement with life, just that feeling that you are connected to something that's bigger than you. And that ties in with belonging to groups. And it might be a football team or something like that. It might be a religious group, but just any sense that you are part of something bigger than just you is really, really helpful. So I use this in my work as a kind of checklist. And I find that the more of these needs that are not being met, the greater the stress and distress that people are likely to be suffering. And for some people, it's just a light bulb moment. Sometimes I get them to fill the form out and they've put 2 and 2 together. It can be a bit of a mystery. Why am I feeling like I'm feeling when my life appears to be working? I might have a great job. I might have a partner. I might have 2 children. I might have a lovely house. I might go on several holidays a year, but yet I don't feel good. And why is that? Well, it's probably because some of your emotional needs are not being met.
That's a really interesting list you've got there. It does make me think a little bit about the coaching wheel of life, but this seems just a bit more personal, almost a bit more specific.
Yeah.
Rather than categorizing things in that kind of work family section. This is very personal to you, isn't it? It's really bringing it right home to yourself.
It kind of evolves from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that I think many people will be familiar with that anyway. And it's just that notion of human needs and the effect of unmet needs on our psychology and our physiology. And it's a really simple lens through which to look at emotional health and well-being. And very often the explanation is very clear. But when you start to do some work, if you're a life coach, for instance, on the coaching wheel of life, and create a picture then of the parts of your life that are working and are not working, the more low scores you get, the chances are you're going to be experiencing some symptoms of stress or distress in some way.
It's a really interesting formula to use, I think, because I think it's no different than when I was teaching and I had children we were trying to teach that had stuff going on at home.
Yeah.
They couldn't learn as well because there was too much going on. It's that same principle, isn't it? That even if they come for some new career goals, that might not work if there's some of these things in this list. If somebody's not feeling safe, for instance, that's going to impact actually what's going on in a coaching session anyway.
100%. Yeah, because safety takes absolute priority. The brain is always checking out every second of every day. Am I okay? Am I not okay? It's always checking out the environment, because if something in the environment feels unsafe, then fight or flight might need to be engaged, to save the skin. So that's just the basic way the human brain operates.
Exactly. And it's also interesting how when you describe depression, you mentioned about that withdrawing and the isolation. Yeah. It's almost a self-sabotage in a way that actually you're saying one of the things we need is that connection.
Yeah.
And yet we hit depression and we withdraw even more. So we're going against what might be good for us potentially, with the right people, of course, in that situation. But it's an interesting response.
Yeah, that's how long-term anxiety and stress lead to depression, because it affects our sleep at night time. It saps our motivational energy. Then we're not functioning. And because we feel so tired, then we start to withdraw. And then you're not having fun with family and friends. Perhaps the emotional intimacy is suffering. Perhaps your sense of status is being affected because you don't feel you're doing a proper job at work, that sense of achievement. And perhaps you start to feel that you're losing control of your life and your emotional well-being. And so the whole thing then just becomes a kind of spiral that you need to intervene at some point by working with somebody like a therapeutic coach, a wellbeing practitioner, but somebody that can help you just identify what's not working in your life, because seeing these as symptoms of something that's not working can lead you towards taking action. There's a great way to put a fence around worry, actually, that I do recommend to clients. It's the 4D worry technique. Shall I tell you about that? Because it's a great thing, and it absolutely works. The job of our worries is to alert us to something that's not working in our lives. But if you think about worries, they're very circular. It's the same old, very often it's the same old worries that keep tapping you on the shoulder. But if you don't do anything about them, then they will continue to tap you on the shoulder and wake you up at night. But this is what you do. I'm not going to tell you not to worry. I'm just going to tell you need to worry well. And to worry well, you need to put a fence around worry. If you allow yourself, for instance, 10 or 15 minutes a day where you do nothing but sit down and worry, but do it properly, then that's going to free up the other 23 3/4 hours of the day. So what you do is you sit down with a blank piece of paper and you just write down all of the things you're worrying about. Stream of consciousness, just get it all down on the paper. And then you flip the paper over and you create 4 headings. And the 4 Ds are do, delay, delegate, or ditch. So you take your worries and you're going to ask yourself, okay, do I need to do something about this? If so, what am I going to do? Do I need to delay a decision? Am I going to put this off till next week, next month, next year? Am I going to just delay it? Am I going to delegate this to somebody else? Is this actually somebody else's problem? If it's a medical issue, do I need to delegate it to my GP or something like that? Or in recognition that if I worried about this 24/7, it's not going to make a blind bit of difference, like world peace, for instance. I'm going to have to put this on the back burner and just leave it. And if you do that for 10 or 15 minutes a day, your brain will get the message, because remember, it's always trying to communicate with you. It's always trying to help you. Your emotions are your very best friends. But these worries will continue to tap you on the shoulder until you sit down and listen to them and come up with a plan. Even if the plan is, I'm going to defer this. Because the brain then realises, I've communicated, I have been heard, there is a plan. And of course, you come back to it for 10 or 15 minutes the next day and you do exactly the same thing. And then you sleep better at night time.
I love that. I think I'm going to adopt it myself.
It works.
Do delay, delegate, and ditch. Yeah, that's just fantastic.
100% works. And of course, what it does, if you think about it, it absolutely cuts into that spiral where you're over worrying in the daytime, over dreaming at nighttime, using up motivational energy, and waking up feeling shattered in the morning. It absolutely cuts into that, and it only takes 10 or 15 minutes a day to do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What I've liked about our conversation today, Frances, is that all the things that coaches can do that you've suggested, including just being a coach, aren't complicated.
No.
And you don't need to have a psychology degree to enact them either. So I think that's really encouraging and powerful for coaches, and encouraging them not to ignore potential signs in clients that may have signs of anxiety and depression, but to just be a coach and be holistic, and like you've said, which is another key part of how you work.
Yeah, you just acknowledge that you're with a human being, and a human being is going to have human needs. And if those needs are not met, they're going to be stressed or distressed in some way.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful thing to say, just to remember that we're a human being and with all our different needs and facets. Before we get to the final question, how can people reach you, Frances? I know you have some training. You did an article in our Coaching Perspectives magazine a couple of issues ago, which is where I found you, on your Fusion coaching and counselling. Would you like to tell people a bit more about how to contact you or where to find your training?
Yeah, well, you can have a look at the Integrated Coaching Academy website, which is where you can contact me about my distance learning skills certificate and the online diploma now, which is running. So you can do that. Or you can email me at fusionme@btinternet.com. So you can get in contact that way. You can sign up to my newsletter. I've got a newsletter. So if you get in contact on there, you can become part of the newsletter. And I try every week to send out practical tips and tools that everyone can use, really, to help with people's emotional well-being. Yeah, so that's the best way to get in contact, I think.
Yeah, I think you've given some wonderful, quite down-to-earth solutions for coaches to use in some ways in this conversation. I found it personally very helpful just to listen to some of your ideas, and I think that it will be really helpful for coaches to just think about these simple things like breathing and just checking with people using scaling, which has always been a fantastic tool that I think, just allows us to give an instant intuitive response to how we're feeling without thinking too much and trying to control and manage it. So, yeah, some really, really great tips. But is there anything that you'd like to say as a sort of final tip or final piece of advice for coaches before we leave?
I think just stay open to the idea that you're working with a human being, and even executives are human. They all have innate needs. I think also, no matter whatever culture your client is from, they are still a human being. And so the same principles apply. So I think if you want to embrace the psychological aspect to your coaching work, if you look at it through the lens of innate human needs, you're going to keep the work in safe territory. And I think if you're looking to create a safe bridge between the worlds of coaching and counselling or some psychological support, then that's a safe bridge to use, innate needs.
Yeah, and it actually in some ways relates to a coach feeling safe enough to tackle things when they arise in a coaching session, because I've met some coaches on training courses that I've been supported where they've been really quite afraid to deal with any of this, even though you can't control what is going to walk through your door. We can never work with people and predict anything that's going to happen, from my experience. Yeah. So in fact, it relates very much to that innate need that even for a coach, they've almost, you're encouraging them to feel safe, to not avoid what might come up in a session with somebody's mental health.
Yeah, I think mental health has become hugely complicated. In my experience, it's very simple. It's down to innate needs and the role of emotions, and having some practical tips, tools and techniques so that people can take back control of their own emotional well-being and take control of their lives.
reclaim their lives.
Reclaim their lives. Exactly.
Which is your one of you. It's just a phrase that you use a lot. Frances, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I think the information you've shared has been invaluable. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I normally end my newsletters with, I hope it helps. And so I hope this has helped somebody somewhere in some way.
Thank you. It's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our page at www.associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.